Welcome to the Inside Nebraska Recruiting Blitz podcast. I'm Tim Verghese as always, and this week I'm joined by our Midwest regional analyst, Greg Schmitt. Greg, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back, man. Always good to be with you.
Yes, sir. Good to catch up. I guess this weekend we were all at UTEP, kind of wondering where Greg was. It's the first home game, first Nebraska home game since 2013. You weren't in attendance. I guess watching from home, and obviously your job's a little different, but watching from home, kind of what
Yeah.
were your takeaways from Nebraska season opener?
Yeah, first of all, it was a very weird experience because I didn't realize that it had been 10 plus years since I've been doing this, covering like specifically Nebraska. So you don't think about like, man, I was like, man, I don't have to get up super early to go to the game. Now I was flying back in. I flew back in from Michigan, seeing Bryce Underwood on Saturday morning early, so I could get back for the game. But yeah, it was this kind of a surreal experience, kind of watching all of you guys do your thing and kind of following along with your work. To plug you quick, I did listen to you and Steve's like preview podcast, Talking Ball, the unnamed podcast at this point. It was very good. I enjoyed it. I learned some stuff because I'm not able to follow it as closely like on the football side. But my takeaways on the game, like I thought that Nebraska, two things jumped out to me, and one of them is actually not Dylan Raiola. The first thing that jumped out was really the offensive line and how they were moving the line of scrimmage to create running lanes. I thought that they ran the ball fairly consistently well in that game, which is something that I know that I saw the stat where like UTEP's defensive line averaged 270 pounds, right? And so you should be moving them. But think about it, Nebraska had not been doing that. That was something that had been a real gripe of the fan base, that like when they went up against these smaller opponents, they were not able to lean on them and run the football effectively at all in recent years. And so to be able to do that, I thought was a really, really encouraging sign because also of what we saw from Dylan Rayola. Like I do think that he was as good as advertised. I thought that Matt Rule calling out after the game about him getting them into that one run, and the checks that he was making and him having kind of full control and command of the offense, I thought was super impressive. And then the defense was what it was, right? Like they did kind of what we expect them to do. That's the type of defense they're going to play, I think, all year long, if not better than what they did, because they had some bumps in the road there early and then they settled in. But I thought it was a really impressive week one, and something also, though, it gave them enough to continue to build off of going into Colorado.
Yeah, and for you, I guess in your current role, I guess obviously reaching out to guys all over the region. I guess early impressions from recruits around the area of the game. Was there anything that you picked up, and just like recruits taking notes of Dylan, what the offense looks like?
Yeah, I do think that this was okay, that it looked like what we were hoping or what the coaches had said it looked like this week, and then now it's kind of like, okay, the big game is coming. Like it's an interesting one. It's like I think it's just kind of a, hey, you passed that first test, and recruits are happy that they won that game, and it's kind of a check the box thing. I think that everybody's waiting to see what happens in the Colorado game, even though I think as the fan base is not necessarily skipping over like having a win in that kind of emphatic fashion in a game in which you get like 100 players on the field, and you get to win by double digits and all that. Like that's not to be taken for granted from the fans, because you have not seen that in recent years in these types of games. But I think recruits are like, okay, let's get to the big show after this one.
Yeah, and we'll get to the Colorado, I guess the visitor list, that loaded list that's expected to be in town. But touching on the guys that were in town for this UTEP game, I guess the most notable one, 2025 four-star linebacker Christian Jones out of Omaha West Side. I went and saw him on Thursday actually, and
Yeah.
talked to him after the game, and was like, "You got any visits planned?" And he at the time was like, nothing yet, nothing imminent. And then the next day in the afternoon, he texted me. He's like, "Hey, I know you asked yesterday. My fault. Just last minute ended up setting up a visit to Nebraska." And now he's planning on he not only came in this last weekend, but he's planning on being back again next week. The biggest development there, just talking to him on Thursday after the game, um, it's down to Oklahoma, Nebraska. He's pretty much saying it's coming down to these two schools. I think like Miami, I think, involved at one point, but the fact that he never made it down there at this point, I think they're just out of it. And Miami's got their own, issues to worry through. I was talking to someone on the Oklahoma side of things as well. Oklahoma's kind of reaching out to some other linebacker targets. They're back in it for Elijah Melendez, for example, and they're kind of, digging at some other guys, or poking around at some other guys. So I think the fact that Christian's making I guess my read on this right now is Christian making two back-to-back visits, seeing what he was able to see this past weekend, and just he's mentioned all offseason he wants to see improvement from Nebraska,
Yeah,
and he
for
saw
sure.
that these two visits happening. I think you just have to feel more confident in Nebraska's chances here.
Yeah, I feel increasingly confident about Nebraska's chances here. I guess when this goes live, this will have been out that I put in a future cast for Christian Jones on Monday morning, and in part fueled by what you were just talking about. I think that the back-to-back visits, the combined with he's one that it was really important to see the win against UTEP and to see it in that fashion because it now starts to look like a program that a top guy like that really wants to be a part of. You know, obviously he's well aware and he can come down whenever. But I think the biggest holdup for Christian Jones is I want to make sure that if I go to Nebraska, we're going to play high level football that I know we're going to play at these other schools that I'm considering. And at this point, it's just Oklahoma. But you know that you're, say, for example, to boil it down to a basic level, you're going to go to bowl games at Oklahoma, right? Like, so you want to make sure that sort of level of football is going to be played when you're in Lincoln as well. And if it continues to look like they're trending that way, I do think that Nebraska ends up winning that recruitment. I think that getting him back on campus for the Colorado game is enormous. I think that having him there in that atmosphere, and should they win that game and they open up as a favorite, if they take care of business and win that game, I think it'll go a long, long way to really solidifying their position with Christian Jones. And I do think it's a great situation for him. I get it with Oklahoma in a way, and they're not that far from home, but I just have always felt like in the end, the kind of the comfort factor of being closer to home, I think could also in out, all things being equal on the field. That's really been the big wild card. If Nebraska was continuing to sputter and struggle on the field, I don't think he would be coming here. But I do think that they'll take care of business, and that will help in a big way with him.
For sure, and we were impressed with what we saw on Thursday from him. Had an interception. Thought he should have had another one, but
Uh-huh.
he wasn't able to haul that in. But active all over the field, kind of flashing that athleticism. We also saw, I guess, just one I wanted to make a quick note of. We also saw 2027 offensive tackle Matt Erickson on Friday
Okay.
night for the first time. Listed at 6'8", 280. I think my initial impression just seeing him in person. Not that it's a bad thing. He's still a giant, giant human being, but he's closer to 6'6" than he is 6'8".
Okay.
And but built well, built proportionally well. Fluid mover in space again for that size. Literally looks the part of like a college offensive tackle
Okay.
as a high school sophomore. Like I'm really interested to see what he looks like in 2 years as a high school senior. I think there's some work that needs to be done. I think a little bit just as a young player, first game on varsity, just young, like needs some work to just like translating power from his body into his hands,
Okay.
and kind of just exploding through the body. Just working in space and some of the technique stuff, but that'll all come with time. But the overall athletic I live floor right now and just the foundation
Yeah.
he has athletically is really, really impressive. And he was another one that came into town this past weekend and plans to be back next weekend.
Yeah, and he's one to me. I've got to go out and see him this week. It'll be like early when I have a game locally. He'll be one that I go and see because I do want to see him move in person. Because one of the things, and I'm glad you could have noted his kind of early development stages. We've got a long ways to go. He's just a sophomore. He can continue to get better. The one thing that you can't teach is that size. Even if he's closer to 6'6" than 6'8", like you can't teach that size. So if he continues to work on his craft and really translates that power and also continues to get better with his footwork, like he's going to be a real intriguing prospect. Like that's a kid that you could definitely see colleges being excited about to get him into their program and in their weight room and start to really mold him because like you said, he looks the part of a college lineman already. It's just putting it all together at this point.
For sure, and he's a guy that I think could start to explode on the trail this
Mm-hmm.
fall. I was thinking of a couple actually 2027s in state that could do that this fall. I think the thing with Erickson was working in Nebraska's favor. That's a Nebraska legacy. Nebraska was the first to offer, has remained on top of him since offering in the summer, and they're getting him in town multiple times this fall. I feel good about where Nebraska stands early on, but again, it's a long, long way to go till
He's gonna be that guy though that you forget for now is not in the class because he's gonna be
Mhm.
there every week. He's
Yep.
gonna, he's gonna be there all the time, and so you're gonna be like, oh yeah, he's actually not committed yet.
Yep. And then another one actually in the 26 class that has already started to be that like not committed but has been there a lot. Jase Reynolds, the linebacker out of Elkhorn North.
Yep.
He's visited 3 times in 3 months at this point. We'll be back next week for the Colorado games. That'll make it 4 times in 4 months that he's been in Nebraska. Since landing that offer back in June, I mean, he mentioned at the time, born and raised a Nebraska fan, like was obviously very excited about the offer. And he's made it known he wants to explore some other options. He's got some regional schools in touch. But at this point, I mean, like that's another one where it's just like it feels like a matter of time before Nebraska wins out there.
Yeah, for sure. A real athletic kid at linebacker, 6'2", 6'3", 190, 200 pounds. A kid that can really run, right? And so that's someone that they would love to have inside of that defense. They like to kind of collect those types of athletes. And you see it kind of translate on the field when you think about what they look like on the field. When you have these different guys that you can plug and play at various spots and keep your defense real versatile, Reynolds kind of fits within that mold. But I also, yeah, with him continuing to visit, and I know, like you said, he wants to explore some options, but it's going to be tough for someone to kind of surpass Nebraska on this one. I think they're way out in front right now. And especially considering they had that early offer, they're going to continue pushing for him. He'll continue to be back around the team. Again, it's tied into if the team continues to have success this year. You have to think about this. And this is something that I don't think we give enough credit to, is that if we do see Nebraska have a good season, these kids haven't seen that. And so they also haven't seen the excitement that would come along in town with that. And this is where some of those local prospects in particular, when they can really feel that buzz and that energy on a consistent basis at their high school and around town and all of that, like I think that's going to make a difference and can really add up on a lot of these local recruitments too.
For sure. Yeah, actually, I was just thinking about that this weekend, like being back in Lincoln and just seeing the game day crowd. And I was like, again,
Mm-hmm.
there's excitement this year for what this team could be. There was excitement last year as well. And the last time I can think of this level of excitement was year one of Scott Frost. But the fact that we're at this point where, you can get this level of excitement and you've got a big game next week. So that's 2 weeks in a row where you've kind of just got an exciting game day atmosphere in town. You hope this season, Nebraska accomplishes what they want to down the line, that Ohio State game, that USC game, like they may not be all at home, but these or Wisconsin, like and these type of games will draw out big crowds and rowdy environments and just excitement again. And like you mentioned, for
Yep.
these kids that are in the state or at least even local, in the region, Nebraska winning, does make an impact. These kids talk about it in school, and it's like like you remember what it was like growing up and the
Yeah.
local team kind of won and how excited you were to be on the school bus on Monday and talk about it with your
Right.
friends and every class period being like, what did you see at the, you know what I mean? And so I think the exact same way. I think that's something that, again, like you mentioned, has not been felt by these recruits. Before we transition to the looking ahead to that Colorado visitor list, one name real quick. He was hoping to be in town for the Colorado game, but unfortunately his school football schedule wasn't able to make it work. So he came up a week early. Deacon Schmitt out of Windsor, Colorado. That's a rising offensive tackle. Nebraska's battling Oklahoma, a couple other schools for. This is a guy that's on the rise. I think he's another one that's going to get a couple more Power Four offers this fall. Um, but he was back in town for him as well. This was the third visit in 3 months. He visited and got an offer back in June, came back in at the end of July, and is now back in town. Was back in town on August 31st, and now plans to return for at least one more game this fall if he can, make the long drive over from Windsor. He's been doing that drive back and forth from
Okay.
Windsor, Colorado to Lincoln,
It's
Nebraska
a
and
tough
back,
one.
which is a tough one. But that's a guy that Nebraska's in on early, and it kind of shows us kind of what they're looking for at offensive line and where that unit is trending with like a guy like him in the region where Nebraska is very in early on and battling a school like Oklahoma for.
Yeah, and these are exactly the types of battles that it's funny, and you know this, when Nebraska is starting to be able to grab some of these guys or really get their hooks in early on these type of prospects that you can just see that this kid could he's either going to blow up in his recruitment and he's going to be, a 30 offer guy, or he could be a guy that he doesn't blow up that way because he essentially says to schools, hey, really Nebraska and Oklahoma are who I'm looking at. And so, he basically, thanks with no thanks, which is also a way that kids go, and that could be totally fine. But just because he doesn't then pick up a ton of offers doesn't mean that he's not a highly coveted prospect, right? I think that I could see it going that way, and I think that he's a really good player, number one. But I think that also it's important that Nebraska continue to try to grab talent from Colorado and make its presence known there. They've obviously done that here recently, like Rex Guthrie and Landon Davidson, those guys coming over from that state. And I think that it ties into the upcoming opponent, as Colorado continues to just kind of overlook those guys for whatever reason, then Nebraska should be a team that stands to benefit from what's going on out there. And Colorado has always historically been a state that Nebraska has recruited well. And I think that Matt Rule and his staff are smart for trying to pick that back up.
Sure, and that's a state I think that's also picking up in talent, just in terms of
Yeah.
like the talent specifically that's centered around like the greater Denver area, and then
Mm-hmm.
Colorado Springs and just like the close to even Boulder as well. Like you're starting to see kind of talent start to pile up a little bit over there, and yeah, like Nebraska can benefit from that just from the fact that they're in early on a bunch of those guys, and regardless of what happens with this Colorado staff, they weren't in early. That's the
Right.
in-state school that hasn't gotten in early, even if they do get involved at some point. It does mean a lot when schools outside of the state are in on you and they're
And you
not.
see that you see it all the time. That's one of the things that people ask me this all the time. Like, what's one of the kind of things you've noticed after transition to a national role versus just covering Nebraska? I used to think that was only like a Nebraska problem, that kids in the state of Nebraska being mad that Nebraska didn't offer them early. That's everywhere. And it's funny how you can either take advantage of it or you can be on the bad side of it. We've seen Nebraska be on the bad side of that. But in this case and some others, you see them really taking advantage of that as well. It's just interesting to me how that always goes.
For sure. Yeah. Oh, there's guys in specifically Texas and Florida. It's like, okay, hey, if I get
Mm-hmm.
a couple offers before in Texas, the big two, Texas and Texas A&M, or in Florida, the big three, Florida, Florida State, and Miami. If I get an offer or offers from some schools outside of the state before that, I'm not going to explore those options. Like, one, again, looking ahead to next week's game, four-star quarterback Michael Clayton out of Sanford Seminole.
Mm-hmm.
That's a guy that Miami, Florida, and Florida State all either are recruiting other 26 quarterbacks or have other 26
I
quarterbacks.
have them,
So
yeah.
a talented rising gunslinger from Florida is not planning on staying in state. This is what that's an opportunity where Nebraska, who's getting him on campus for the second time this weekend for the Colorado game. That's an opportunity where Nebraska could really come in and win some. Turning that page to that Colorado game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a handful of 2025s expected in town that are or at least not committed to Nebraska.
Yeah.
We've kind of mentioned all August. There was a chance that Michael Terry is eyeballing that Colorado game for a potential chance to return to Nebraska. As we're getting closer to that game, I think that visit's more up in the air than initially expected. Um, as of just right now, there just hasn't been confirmation. And there was a point where he was really excited about that visit, and now we're getting closer to it. I just don't know if he makes it into town with Texas trending and Oregon still battling over there. On the flip side, a receiver in Nebraska is planning now to get in town in the 2025 class. Four-star Oklahoma wide receiver commit Cortez Mills is planning to be in town, and this is a guy that Nebraska was really in on. If you remember our reporting back in the spring and in June, when he made it back into town, this is a guy that Nebraska loves. Dylan Raiola himself has been personally recruiting him. Since Dylan arrived on campus, Dylan's been in touch pretty much every day, is what Mills made it sound like. And Nebraska hasn't slowed up the contact, even when he did commit to Oklahoma. They're working to flip him, and Oklahoma has a very strict visit policy for their
Yeah,
commits.
they're one of
So,
those schools. Yeah.
kind of what do you read into the fact that he's visiting while still committed in Oklahoma? Again, the policy they have.
That is the wrinkle there that really perks my ears up here, because if you're a prospect that knows that the school you're committed to does not like these visits when you're committed to other schools, and you take one anyway, especially a high profile visit like this, yeah, that tells me that he's really still kind of weighing his options and really kind of considering Nebraska to be where he plays his college football. I thought that Nebraska was really and I thought in a real good position over the summer for Cortez Mills, and things just kind of trended quickly away and went OU's way for that initial commitment. And I think that at the time, a lot of us thought that what maybe was kind of an initial commitment, and we'd see kind of how that went. And we're kind of seeing that play out right now. I think that the having Dylan Raiola be so involved with this one and then seeing how Dylan played in week one. And then if he goes out and plays well again against Colorado, like these receivers are really going to start to come around on whether or not on flipping or guys in the future that want to then come and play. And I think Cortez Mills will be a really good, interesting first case study kind of in that. And on a note too, on Nebraska, the staff, their ability to stay in it with these targets too. They're a staff that it's funny because Matt Rule comes off, and it is true. He's a good guy, and like he says a lot of the right things, and like he's in the community and all of that. But also, there's some killer instinct in there too when it comes to recruiting, because man, they do a good job of sticking with kids that commit elsewhere and then end up flipping guys in the end. I think that this is going to be a theme that we see unfold under the Matt Rule tenure here at Nebraska. I think they're going to always be a dangerous flip team when it comes to some of these targets, because they just do such a good job of building relationships and then maintaining them throughout the process.
Yeah, I definitely think, again, if Nebraska accomplishes what they do or they want to on the field, there's a chance, or not even a chance, but like I think that you're going to see some surprises just in terms of who makes it into town. It's like, wait, Nebraska's still in contact with him, or
Yeah, I
Nebraska's
agree.
still
Yeah.
working there. Like you're going to see a couple of those this year. And again, if these continue to like, the trajectory of the program does continue upwards. Looking ahead to 26 as well, they've got some names in there, they're involved with, and guys, they may not be as involved with anymore, but or on the surface, at least on from the public's view, aren't involved in anymore, but they find themselves back involved with. A quick rundown of some 26s in the region planning to be in town. We'll have a full visitor list at some point this week over at Inside Nebraska, because that list is ever changing and going to
Yeah.
be ever updating even as we get like 24 hours out from the game. So I think we're going to end up putting a full visitor list out towards the end of the week. But a quick rundown of some Midwest names already planning to be in town. Five-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell. His first game day visit of the year is going to be to Nebraska. His second game day visit to Nebraska in as many years. He's back in town. Hudson Parliament, four-star offensive lineman from South Dakota. This is a rising prospect Nebraska has been in on early. Nebraska's hoping to secure, battling Iowa and a couple others for four-star defensive end Hunter Higgins out of Kansas. Nebraska's battling Oklahoma there. Jaden McGregory, four-star safety out of West Des Moines Valley in Iowa. Isaac Jensen, local kid, three-star tight end out of Millard South. He's planning to be in town. And JJ Dunnigan, that's another a three-star corner out of Manhattan, Kansas. Nebraska's battling Kansas State, and that's a kid I think is a bit of a hidden gem. And once he gets some junior tape out there, starts to see his recruitment take off if he, like you mentioned, so chooses, because he's a guy that I could see just being like, I'm just focusing on the schools that have already
No, I
offered
could
me.
totally see that. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I
of
think
those
that
names, okay, what catches your eye? What are the big visitors there?
the thing that catches my eye is that I think that Nebraska is the formula that they're starting to put together with these Midwest kids, right? As we knew that they were going to recruit Texas well, and you'll have Texas guys coming up as well, I'm sure. But the guys in the Midwest are the key players that they really need to get, because I think that that's how they can build this program kind of for the long haul, right? And I think that having guys like Jackson Cantwell obviously is the headline name wherever he shows up, being the five-star kid that he is. I think he's a future first-round draft pick, all of that, right? And so I think that having him back on campus and having Nebraska be a school that I think is a true contender for him, that I think that people, and I wrote about this I think last week, I think that Nebraska is a contender for Jackson, and I think that people don't quite realize like how good of a relationship that is between him and Nebraska's staff. Because on its surface, when you look at them battling, LSU and Alabama and Georgia, the in-state Missouri Tigers who have been on the come up, like it just looks weird. But I think Nebraska's in a good spot there. Just keep getting him back on campus. But the guy that really, really catches my eye, Hudson Parliament. Okay, that kid, I think, and we went early four-star on him. And I think that he could continue to grow. When I talk, or continue to grow with his ranking and continue to get better as a player. I talked to him not too long ago about it, and he said that he's talked to a lot of college coaches that are like, "Hey, we love your potential. We just got to get you the right tools and get you coached up. We're going to go." And I think that that's exactly right. Is that he's a kid that his recruitment's only going to go so far up, like as far as the amount of schools, because of him being in the Dakotas. Like it just feels like those guys, like they kind of get locked in with a couple of schools schools, and then it just kind of goes from there. But like you mentioned, some good ones that are going to after him early on. Jaden McGregory, the four-star defensive back out of Iowa, that we talked earlier about the in-state schools kind of overlooking or not. Iowa has been slow on that one. Nebraska benefiting on that situation, and I think he's a really good player. And it's a real exciting list, I think, of Midwest prospects coming into town that it could go a long way, having a good showing and just getting them into that big time atmosphere, because I can't imagine how electric it's going to be on Saturday night.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think more than anything, I mean, me and Inside Nebraska's team, Eric, kind of debated this back and forth all offseason. Whether this game is a must win or not for Nebraska. I think if Nebraska at the very, very least plays competitive compared to the last couple matchups with Colorado. Like you compete with Colorado down the stretch. And again, like just from what we saw in week one, I'm not going to go out and throw any type of prediction here, but I think Nebraska's going to be able to hold their own at the very least. But if you're able to hold your own in that environment, and I'm sure you've picked up on this too, results don't necessarily matter to recruits as much as you think. For
Yeah.
recruits
Oh yeah, for
specifically, it's
sure.
about, experiencing that environment that like, oh, this is like and I'm expecting like this Nebraska crowd to be one since like, the Miami game back in like
Yeah.
2014 or like that first Nebraska game under Scott Frost, that Akron game that got canceled, like just that pregame electricity, that Michigan game a couple years ago.
Yeah. Great
I'm just
game.
expecting it to be like one of the better environments, and that'll make an impression regardless of what happens in the game. As long as Nebraska again holds their own, I think just the environment alone is something. And why Nebraska is betting so heavy on this game, just in terms of we want the visitors at this game. Because win or a loss here could certainly hurt them on the trail, but I don't think it will as much as people think. Just because again, the cool thing about not the cool thing, but the thing about losses in recruiting is you can go to guys and be like, okay, listen, the reason we're not we want to get over this hump, and you can be the reason why.
Right.
And recruits will resonate with that.
Oh yeah, there's always. It's funny the amount of recruits. There are recruits that will resonate towards the winning and wanting to join a winning program, and there are some kids that falls under like Christian Jones. We talked about that he falls into that, but there are others that will certainly, if there's a path to playing time because the team isn't as good, will still pick them. Now, on the whole, if you had to pick this weekend, you want them to win for those purposes, though, because you're going to take. Because the thing about what Nebraska needs to do is Nebraska needs to show that the year two Matt Rule bump is in full effect. Because if you show that to recruits, then they're going to say, oh, we know what he does in like year 3 or 4. So we want to be a part of this thing like that. And so that's why it's so important for Nebraska. It's a unique situation, I think, in that way, where Nebraska really does need to stack some wins. And then I think later on, there are some games, though, that you're kind of playing with house money or you just want to be competitive in some of those. But I think that continuing to show that progress and then hitting the bowl game, making the postseason for the first time in years, like that's like 7 years, I think. Like I think those are the things they have to get over the hump on.
For sure. Yeah, I think at least, I think like I've got him going 8-4 this year, but I think you have to at least make a bowl game this year in order to sustain the recruiting statistics they're having. And again, like for guys to Jack for like Jackson Cantwell and Brandon Arrington out of California, for those guys to keep coming back into town, you gotta keep
Yeah.
stacking wins like this. You gotta win, you gotta show that you're making on-field progress. You gotta show development. When we're talking to Christian Jones last week, it was just like, hey, what's left? What do you want to see from Nebraska? And it was just like again, like the off-field talk needs to match the on-field performance,
Right.
and we need evidence that this development is happening. And I think he saw some of that. The fact that Nebraska was able to clear the benches and get 100 plus
Yep.
guys in on Saturday is evidence that development is happening. The fact that you've got second-year players like Amir Stewart stepping in to the two deep after
Yes,
not really
sir.
being mentioned for most of fall camp and spring. He's coming in and he doesn't only make the two deep, but he hauls in an interception in his first game.
Mm-hmm.
I think stuff like that, seeing Vincent Shavers, a freshman linebacker,
Mm-hmm.
on the field as early as he is evidence of okay, development is happening. So Nebraska needs to continue checking these kind of boxes in order to keep landing guys. But there's an exciting week on the horizon. I think they have a real opportunity this weekend to at least make some noise on the recruiting trail. They're gonna make some waves with the names that end up coming into town. This is the early list. It's Monday when we're recording this, and
Right.
by Thursday, Friday, I think you're going to see some big additions to the list, especially coming off the week that they had. I think the world and the nation specifically kind of got a feel for, okay, Dylan Rail is real.
Oh yeah, he was the talk
Is
of college where like everyone was talking about him during that
yeah.
game. That and all
And
the freshmen, like that's the like it's related to Dylan, but not like the all the freshmen that had great weeks this week. Man, what a great young class of guys that came in to
yeah.
college football this year.
Yeah, oh, we're blessed with this 24 class.
God,
It's been really fun so far. And Nebraska's gonna face some of these guys. We
yeah,
saw USC Sunday night, fun group of receivers over there. Ohio State, Jeremiah Smith already has 2 touchdowns. Like
yeah.
he's here, he's arrived, and so it's gonna be exciting. I'm excited to see those guys in person. But of course, for Nebraska, you hope to win those games or at least show so compete in those type of games. Before we get out of here, Greg, I guess any lasting thoughts going into Colorado and just what Nebraska has a chance to potentially do on the recruiting trail?
Yeah, I think that it's just a huge opportunity. It can't be said enough for them to be able to show off that atmosphere and then show off what a night game in Lincoln can be like if Nebraska wins one of these games. Because it can't be said enough that we have all of those games that we just mentioned about that were great atmospheres in Lincoln. I think all of them, except for maybe going back way back to that Miami game, were all losses, right? And so, what does it look like if Nebraska has one of these electric environments where they actually win the game? And so that I think is of utmost importance to show these recruits. And I think just to get the ball rolling for some real momentum, I'm excited for it. I'm excited to see it all playing out. I'll be parked in front of the TV, watching along and following along with you guys' coverage because it'll be a fun one to see.
No doubt. Yeah, big week on the horizon, and we've got all the content over at Inside Nebraska. Greg will be helping out with some of the Midwest guys across the state, kind
Yeah.
of figuring out who's in town, who's not. And it's gonna be a big week, I think, just in general. So stay tuned at Inside Nebraska for all our coverage pregame, during the game, post game. We'll have recruiting updates even ahead of the game, and then during the weekend as well. Just some consistent updates as we go. Through the weekend because again it's going to be a big list and there's a lot of names that are probably going to be in town that me and Greg don't even know about yet
Right.
for sure. But that'll do it for us. I guess Greg, one last thing before we hop off. This month, you're on the road a bunch. You went and saw
Yeah.
LSU commit Bryce Underwood last week.
Uh-huh.
Kind of what are some big games on your schedule? What are you excited to see?
Yeah, so I have got some big ones. So, like I said, I was out in Michigan to see Bryce Underwood, our number 2 player in the country. This week, I will be in Ohio to see our number 1 player in the country, Tavian St. Clair. Excited to see him in person in a game. I've actually seen him like 3 times this summer, but I'll see him in a game. And then I will go and see Jackson Cantwell next month out in Nixa. I'll hit some local games as well. I got a St. Louis swing coming up as well. We've got a lot of good stuff on the horizon.
For sure. Yeah. And, we're hitting the road as well. We've got a lot of, at least this month, while Nebraska's got a big home stretch, we're hitting some local
Yeah.
schools, knocking off and getting to see some of these commits in person. Once we get to October, Nebraska's got either 3 weeks of either road games or bye weeks where we'll be on the road. We're making a St. Louis swing ourselves.
Yeah.
We're gonna get down to Kansas to go see Bryson Hayes and Hunter
Nice.
Higgins and some of those kind of guys, and then swing them to the Dakotas at some point and go see
Good.
Hudson Parliament and Sean
Get there
Hammerbeck and
before
those
the
guys.
weather turns.
For sure, for sure. Trying to get
Yeah.
all this traveling in before November. But
Yeah.
that'll do it from us here at Inside Nebraska. Appreciate you, Greg, for joining as always,
Not a
and
problem.
we will catch you all next week.